All right, guys, here are our Fall of Napoleon Bonaparte notes. So at this point, early 1800s, Napoleon is at a height of power. He's restored France politically, militarily, economically. He's done a lot of good things for the country, but he's looking to take those things all over Europe and really conquer most of Europe. And while doing so, he makes a couple of mistakes, and these mistakes are going to lead to Napoleon's downfall. And he fails at all three of these items here: the Continental System policy, the Peninsular War, and the invasion of Russia. So I'm going to detail these mistakes that Napoleon makes when trying to conquer Europe. Firstly, with the Continental System policy, early November of 1806, Napoleon is going to try to set up a blockade of Britain. A blockade meaning preventing imports and exports in and out of the country. And the reason he does this is to hurt the British economy, both commercially with trading and industry, taking those goods and, making them into things. And it's called the Continental System policy because if we look at a map of Europe, Britain is an island off the coast of the continent of Europe. And Napoleon's goal was to make continental Europe, right, not including Britain, more self-sufficient. So he didn't want to rely on British goods and services. And, he wanted to help the French economy. So, his goals for this were good. However, France's blockade does not really work because the British has a better navy. They're able to, blockade France themselves, and that's going to hurt the French economy much worse. So that, number one, reason why Napoleon is going to fail at enforcing the Continental System policy. The second reason is the Peninsular War, 1808 to 1814. And Napoleon is going to attempt to invade Portugal, right? He wants to conquer Europe, so he needs to invade Portugal. And the reason he does this, and invading a lot of countries, is because they're not accepting the Continental System policy. Portugal was still trading with Britain, right? They wanted to make money. And Napoleon didn't like this. So he invades Portugal through Spain. But while he's in Spain, he appoints his brother as king, which is not going to make the Spanish people very happy. And there's going to be a lot of protesting. And the Spanish armies are going to attack France using these new guerrilla warfare tactics, less traditional tactics, more surprise methods. And to make it worse for France, Britain is going to support Spain in this war. And at the end of it, France is going to lose over 300,000 men during the fighting. All right, so now with the first mistake, we see the French economy being hurt, and now we see the military being hurt. And then lastly, kind of a combination of everything here, Napoleon tries to invade Russia, right, which is going to be his most costly mistake. And he invades Russia for really the same reasons he invades Portugal. Russia under Alexander I is not stopping the selling of grain to Britain. So they're not complying with this Continental System policy that Napoleon has put up. And in June of 1812, Napoleon is going to invade Russia with upwards of 420,000 troops, most of them being French troops. I think he had several thousand more troops from other countries that he, annexed, and the lands that he annexed. And Alexander I, the Russian emperor, is going to retreat right away. He retreats because he knows that the French army is superior. But while retreating, he uses what's called the scorched earth policy. And the scorched earth policy is basically exactly what it says. He scorches the earth. He burns crops. He kills livestock. And the reason he does that is he doesn't want to leave anything for France as they are invading into Russia. So it doesn't give France any of the Russian resources. So Napoleon continues his invasion. He gets to Moscow, and when he gets to Moscow, he notices that it's totally ablaze. There are not a lot of people around. And now at this point, winter is starting, and Russian winters get very cold. Now, during the invasion, France is going to win a number of battles, but they're not going to be able to fully defeat the Russian armies under Alexander I. The Russian campaign is one of the bloodiest of the Napoleonic Wars, and at the end of it, Napoleon is left with only 10,000 battle-ready soldiers. Um, a lot of them starve, with the winter. A lot of them are just injured, missing, right? All these casualties that take place. So those are the three things that Napoleon does poorly that are really going to lead to his demise. So with his downfall, now after witnessing these mistakes that Napoleon is making, other countries are going to jump on these weaknesses that Napoleon has. Russia, Prussia, Sweden, Austria are ultimately going to create the Sixth Coalition and look to defeat Napoleon. Now, Napoleon, being the man he is, he's able to raise another army, but they're very ill prepared. They don't have a lot of resources, and ultimately, the Sixth Coalition is able to defeat Napoleon's army at the Battle of Leipzig, a very, very large battle. And in January, after Napoleon loses this battle, these European armies, right, referring to Russia, Prussia, Sweden, Austria, they are going to take Paris, the capital of France. Napoleon does want to keep fighting, but he just doesn't have the army to do so. So he finally accepts the terms of surrender, and he gives up his throne as Emperor of France. And in May of 1814, he's actually exiled to Elba, which is just off the coast of Italy here. So they kick him out of France, and they say, hey, you have to live the rest of your life in Elba. So back in France, they are rulerless. And Louis XVI brother actually takes the throne as the French monarch. He takes the throne as Louis XVIII, right? Now you may ask, well, what happened to Louis XVII? Well, unfortunately, Louis XVI's son, who would have been Louis XVII, dies toward the end of the Revolution in 1795, and France is back to being a monarchy again. I talked about the irony of this in the rise of Napoleon. French revolutionaries sought to get rid of the monarchy. They sought to give people their rights back, and now they're back with one. But Napoleon, again, being the man he is, uses this as an attempt to get power back. And in March, he actually escapes the island of Elba and goes back to France, where it's rumored that these crowds are welcoming him back as the emperor once again. So Europe takes note of this. They know that Napoleon is back in France, and they get mobilizing, meaning they get their armies ready. And now the last coalition forms, and it's basically the same as the Sixth Coalition, and they are looking to defeat Napoleon yet again. And this idea of the 100 days is the time between Napoleon returning, and then ultimately we'll see what happens here. And in June, Napoleon yet again raises another army and attacks the British at the Battle of Waterloo in Belgium. That's where Waterloo is. It's a city in 1815. You may have heard of it. And Britain has a lot of help from Prussia and the Seventh Coalition, and they are actually able to defeat Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, the final battle of Napoleon's Napoleonic Wars. And this 100 days of power, the time between Napoleon, returning and then, ultimately losing, that comes to an end, and the Napoleonic Wars come to an end. And actually, the day that King Louis XVIII is actually restored as the monarchy, that's when the 100 days ends. So it's a very quick stunt, but Napoleon is able to get back to France after being exiled, which is a really a crazy thing to do. So he's exiled yet again, and taking no chances, the British send Napoleon to a remote island off the coast of southern Africa, St. Helena. They really don't want him to come back for a third time here to try to conquer Europe. And Napoleon lives for 6 years after being exiled a second time, writing his memoirs, dying in 1821. Here is just a map to help you see where Helena is, so much farther away than the first exile and off of Italy's coast. So, I apologize here, the legacy of Napoleon is really, really great. Not sure why it's not showing up here. There we go. So Napoleon's legacy is magnificent in some ways. He's a great military genius. He rises up as the leader of the French armies and ends up becoming the Emperor of France, right? And in a lot of ways, yes, he does. Yeah, he becomes a dictator of France. And that's exactly what the French people during the revolution did not want. However, what is revolutionary about it is that after Napoleon is not royalty in any sense, right? He's not part of the the bloodline of Louis XVI, right? So you can think about it like that. On the other side of things, his military accomplishments are, truly great. He conquers most of Europe for the most part. But we have to look at how many men were lost in the invasion of Portugal during the Peninsular War and in his invasion of Russia and all of these wars. He fought against 7 coalitions of alliances. So yes, he's able to defeat a lot of them, but at millions of lives lost, and not just of his armies, but the armies that he fought and the civilians surrounding the areas. If we look at his defeat, looking forward in world history, we notice that there's this opening of the door for a new order and power struggle in France and really all of Europe. We're going to see, modern countries form. We're going to start to see more revolutions happening. So there are a lot of reasons as to why Napoleon could be considered a hero, and a lot of reasons why Napoleon could be considered a villain. And I kind of detailed some of those without actually saying that. But I will leave you with this. French writer Alexis de Tocqueville summarized Napoleon's character by saying he was a great man. He was as great a man can be without virtue. Right? We've talked about virtue, having this moral standards. So yes, great general, great emperor. Could he have been taken as a villain as well? It's tough to tell, but that is Napoleon Bonaparte summarized. And I think this image here, taken much later in his life, obviously, kind of summarizes his feelings at the end of his defeat, much more defeated than in the very first image I showed you of Napoleon.